It was a sight few could have predicted: the esteemed actor Laurence Fishburne, completely overcome by tears. Yet, as President Ibrahim Traoré offered an impassioned oration on the subjects of dignity, legacy, and healing, a profound chord was struck within the veteran performer. During an instant that brought the entire chamber to a standstill, Fishburne cried without restraint, powerless to suppress the surge of feeling. This remarkable occurrence has seized the digital world's focus, serving as a universal reminder of truth's influence and the connections that can bridge generations and cultures. Only moments earlier, the chamber had been alive with merriment. The incessant flash of cameras, the low hum of journalistic chatter, and a palpable sense of anticipation filled the space. Nobody possessed even an inkling of the scene that was about to unfold. There, in the front row, sat Laurence Fishburne, the iconic performer, appearing poised and imperturbable. He was a man accustomed to innumerable interviews, media functions, and formal addresses. This occasion, however, would leave an indelible mark on his spirit. When President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso approached the lectern, a sudden hush fell over the room. His aura was one of both strength and gentleness. He possessed a quiet gravity that commanded attention. Without any formal introduction, Traoré commenced his speech, delving not into matters of politics or authority, but into something far more fundamental. "Dignity," he began, his voice soft as his gaze swept across the assembled crowd. "It is not bestowed by status or affluence. It is bestowed by the way we decide to bear the sorrows of our past and the aspirations for our future." Laurence found himself leaning forward, an unexpected weight settling in his chest. Something in Traoré's tone managed to pierce the world's pervasive clamor. And while no one was yet aware, the following few minutes would move him to tears before a global audience. Traoré went on, his words weaving a tranquil enchantment over the auditorium. "A great many of us," he stated, "carry wounds we never mention, wounds from our history, from injustice, from losses we yearn to erase." He paused, placing a hand over his chest. "But those very scars, they are evidence that we endured. They are evidence that we still have an obligation to heal." A tightness constricted Laurence's own chest. Memories he had long kept submerged began to surface, instances of pain, of witnessing his people's hardships, of private struggles he seldom shared, not even with his most trusted companions. The audience was transfixed. In the prevailing quiet, the drop of a pen would have been audible. Traoré's voice, though serene, seemed to hold the gravity of ages. "And healing," Traoré continued softly, "is not a journey we take for ourselves alone. It is for the generations that follow, so they can walk with more freedom, more stature, and more courage than we ever could." Laurence blinked quickly, his throat tightening. A peculiar warmth was building behind his eyes. He doubted how much longer he could maintain his composure. Then Traoré uttered a phrase that dismantled the final defenses around Laurence's heart. "I am not standing before you as a man of power, but as a son," he declared, his voice cracking with emotion. "A son of Africa, a son of those who were taught they were without worth. And I am here to proclaim to you all, our worth was never in doubt." That declaration struck Laurence with the force of a revelation. He bowed his head, incapable of concealing the tears welling in his eyes. His hands shook as he sought to compose himself, but it was futile. Tears streamed down, his face openly and without shame. The cameras documented every second. A stunned hush descended as one of Hollywood's most formidable and poised figures wept in front of the world. And still, Traoré spoke on, not to break him down, but to elevate him. "We are greater than our pain. We are greater than our struggles. We are the living embodiment of resilience." The audience held its collective breath. Not a soul dared to shift. Laurence whispered under his breath, "My God, he's right." It was a moment the world would not soon forget. The cameras focused on Laurence Fishburne's quivering hands. His shoulders heaved as he fought to regulate his breathing. The man who had portrayed monarchs, warriors, and sagacious mentors was now just a man, humbled by the truth. President Ibrahim Traoré glanced in his direction for a moment, his expression not of pity, but of quiet reverence. He neither stopped his speech nor altered his cadence. Instead, he embraced the moment more fully. "Every tear that we shed," Traoré stated gently, "irrigates the soil where the next generation will stand." Laurence lifted his head. his gaze meeting the president's. It was as if the two men, hailing from disparate worlds, were suddenly linked by an unseen current of understanding. The crowd remained in absolute silence, some clutching handkerchiefs, others covering their mouths in astonishment. Even hardened journalists set aside their notebooks. The room was no longer just observing a speech. They were party to an event that would be etched in history. Laurence wiped at his eyes, murmuring, "Thank you, thank you." Though his voice was nearly inaudible, Traoré gave a slight nod, as if he had heard. Then, with composed deliberation, he prepared to share a story no one anticipated. Traoré rested both hands on the podium, his voice lowering. "When I was a young boy," he started, "I would often sit beneath the trees in my village and listen to my grandfather speak about dignity. He said, 'Genuine dignity is not conferred by the world. It is something born within the soul, even as the world attempts to extinguish it.'" The audience leaned in closer. Laurence's tears had subsided, but his gaze was locked on Traoré. "He explained to me," Traoré went on, "that dignity is the most significant inheritance we can pass on. Not property, not wealth, not authority, but the fortitude to remain upright even when confronting suffering." Laurence's lips quivered. The sentiment mirrored his own father's teachings from long ago. It was as if the president was addressing him personally, penetrating every emotional shield he had. Traoré paused, allowing the gravity of his message to permeate the room. "I carry his wisdom with me, and I offer it today, not as a statesman, but as a son, a grandson, a man who is convinced we are all connected by this same truth." A ripple of gasps went through the auditorium. The emotional atmosphere in the hall became electric with feeling. At this point, Laurence's restraint gave way completely. Tears poured freely down his face, his chest heaving with each tremulous breath. Cameras documented his every reaction, but he was beyond caring. Traoré's voice became even softer. "Brother Laurence, I perceive in your eyes a man who has borne many burdens, and yet you remain standing. You are living proof to the world that dignity can persevere." It was the first time Traoré had spoken to him by name. Laurence's body shook, and for the first time in years, he felt truly seen, not as a movie star, not as an actor, but as a human being. The crowd broke into murmurs, many dabbing at their own tears. A seasoned journalist whispered, "I've never witnessed anything like this." Laurence lowered his face into his hands, whispering through his sobs, "God bless you, brother." Traoré offered a gentle smile. "The blessing is shared, for the truth resides in us all." The room erupted with applause, though many were clapping with tears streaming down their faces. And in that unforgettable instant, the connection between two men from different worlds became a symbol of unity for millions. Observing across the planet, the air in the chamber felt charged, almost sacred. No one made a sound. It was as if every person in attendance was holding their breath, anticipating what Ibrahim Traoré would say next. Laurence Fishburne sat with his hands shaking, his eyes still moist, as if he were a boy once more, receiving wisdom from a long-lost elder. The cameras rolled, but for him, the world beyond that room had ceased to exist. Traoré laid a hand upon his heart. "Some hold the belief that strength is the refusal to show pain," he said, his deep voice unwavering. "But my grandfather imparted the opposite, that genuine strength is the bravery to feel." A woman in the front row began to cry, burying her face in her hands. The sound of her weeping prompted Laurence to close his eyes, absorbing the veracity of those words. Traoré's gaze moved over the crowd. "Tonight, I am not here as a president. I am here as a son of Africa, speaking to the sons and daughters of the world." And with that, the hall felt bound together in a manner that defied simple explanation. As the applause died down, Laurence leaned back in his chair, his thoughts drifting back decades. He recalled the evenings his mother would read to him by the soft glow of a candle, affirming his value even when society seemed oblivious to it. Traoré's words had unlocked something buried deep within. The actor, who had inhabited countless characters on numerous stages, was now giving the most vulnerable performance of his career. Only this time, he had no script. Traoré carried on. A legacy is not founded on monuments or renown. It is founded on the lives we influence, the hope we sow, the dignity we will not relinquish. Laurence's vision hazed over with tears once more. He whispered to himself, "That's what Mom always said." Hope. The cameras captured it. Millions watching from their homes witnessed a titan of the film industry reduced to a child reconnecting with his origins, yet far from being shameful, the moment felt sacred, like a bridge connecting his narrative to Traoré's between two worlds that suddenly felt intimately close. The silence in the room resumed. Everyone leaned forward, sensing that Traoré was leading towards something even more profound. Then, the moment arrived that no one would forget. Traoré inclined slightly, his tone dropping until the hall was compelled into stillness yet again. "I was told once," he said, "that a man dies twice, first when he departs from this world, and again when his name is uttered for the final time. But dignity is eternal." The word struck Laurence like a bolt of lightning. He pressed his palms to his face, his shoulders heaving as the tears fell without check. The audience erupted in suppressed sobs. Even experienced diplomats had tears rolling down their faces. Traoré turned his gaze gently toward Laurence. "Brother, the dignity in your work, the dignity of your spirit, it will never perish. You are more than an actor. You are a custodian of legacy." Laurence's sobs grew audible, and for the first time he rose to his feet, unable to remain seated. The crowd surged up with him, a standing ovation thundering through the hall. And as the applause intensified, millions watching worldwide felt it too, that something exceptional, almost divine, was transpiring before them. As the ovation at last started to subside, President Ibrahim Traoré looked straight at Laurence Fishburne. The room grew still, sensing a more personal exchange was imminent. Traoré's voice dropped, but his words resonated with the weight of truth. "Brother Laurence," he said gently, "I am aware that the weight of being seen is heavy, especially when the spirit is weary." Laurence's chin quivered. Not a soul in the chamber moved. Traoré proceeded, "But strength is not the facade we present. It is the scars we possess and still decide to walk forward with dignity." It felt as though he had spoken directly into Laurence's soul. The actor clutched the edge of the podium in front of him, his breathing ragged. Several people in the audience began to weep. A man in the back murmured, "This is history." The camera zoomed in on Laurence's tear-stained face, transmitting his vulnerability to a global audience. And yet, in that instant, it didn't register as weakness. It felt like a release. For the first time, Laurence nodded slowly, as if embracing a truth he had long evaded. Traoré paused, allowing Laurence a moment to breathe. Then he spoke words that would be etched into memory. "My grandfather often told me," Traoré said, "the world will attempt to break you, but dignity is the one possession they can never take unless you surrender it." Laurence's eyes grew wide. Those words were a direct echo of lessons his own father had imparted to him in his youth. The coincidence, or perhaps destiny, was staggering. The actor shut his eyes and recalled the day his father left him with that same counsel before he passed away. "Never let this world take your dignity, son." Laurence wiped his face with unsteady hands. He whispered to no one in particular, "That's exactly what Dad said." The hall erupted once more, not with clapping, but with the sound of many people crying freely. Journalists who had come to document a routine cultural affair were now reaching for tissues, unable to contain their own emotions. Traoré surveyed the room. "We may hail from different places with different histories, but our pain and our hope speak a common language." And for a brief period, it seemed the entire world was conversing in that language. As the minutes passed, the event was far from concluding. But the very atmosphere in the room had been irrevocably altered. Laurence finally mustered the courage to speak. His voice was shaky, yet lucid. "Mr. President, I arrived here anticipating smiles and laughter, but you have given me something I was unaware I needed. You have reminded me of who I truly am." The crowd gasped. It was extraordinary to witness Laurence Fishburne so unguarded, so raw. Traoré gave a gentle nod. "And you, sir, have reminded the world that even our heroes are human, and that is not a weakness. That is greatness." The audience was on its feet again, applauding, cheering, some weeping without control. Cameras flashed, yet no device could fully capture the potent energy in that auditorium. Laurence placed a hand over his heart and bowed his head in a gesture of respect, not as a Hollywood icon, but as one man humbled by another's truth. Outside, social media was already alight. Hashtags about dignity, healing, and legacy were trending across the globe. Millions who had never heard of the event were now watching clips of it, their own eyes filled with tears. The world was no longer asking what had happened. They were asking what would happen next. The hall had settled once more, following Laurence's poignant words. But President Ibrahim Traoré had more to say. He drew a deep breath, his gaze moving over the crowd, as if to gauge if the world was prepared for his next revelation. Then he spoke softly, his tone a mix of fortitude and sorrow. "Many of you perceive me as a leader, a president," he started. "But before I was that, I was a boy who witnessed his village lose everything. I saw families shattered by conflict. I saw mothers weep in the night with nothing to give their children to eat. And I recall asking myself, why must dignity always be the cost of survival?" The audience leaned forward. Laurence covered his mouth, already anticipating the gravity of what was to come. Traoré's voice faltered slightly. "That was when I made a vow to myself that I would live not for authority, not for affluence, but to guarantee that no child would ever know the void I once felt." A profound stillness enveloped the hall. Even the click of a camera shutter seemed jarringly loud. The weight of his confession was both immense and beautiful. Laurence Fishburne lowered his eyes, tears now streaming uncontrollably down his face. Traoré's words had cut through every layer of Tinseltown glamour, reaching the boy within, him the boy who also knew struggle and sacrifice intimately. He finally whispered, so quietly it was almost lost, "My mother worked 2 jobs, and still there were nights we went to sleep hungry. I never shared that with anyone." Traoré looked at him with serene understanding. "That is why you comprehend me," he said gently, "because pain acknowledges pain, but so does hope." The entire room seemed to breathe a collective sigh. As Laurence's confession hung in the silence, people who had looked up to him for years suddenly saw him anew, not just as a formidable actor, but as a person who had carried unseen burdens. Journalists were no longer scribbling notes. They were dabbing their eyes. Camera operators shifted, some trying to conceal their own tears. And Traoré, rather than maintaining the posture of a head of state, placed his hand gently on Laurence's shoulder. It was a gesture so profoundly human, so tender, it sent a ripple of emotion through everyone present. The crowd realized they were watching a bond form in real time. By now, the tenor of the room had completely shifted. No one was concerned with politics or fame. The only thing that mattered was the unvarnished humanity unfolding before them. Traoré looked out at the attendees. "We cannot always choose the world into which we are born," he stated. "But we can choose the legacy we create. Dignity is not defined by titles. It is defined by how we uplift one another when the world seeks to push us down." Laurence raised his head, his voice cracking. "Tonight, you have reminded me that our stories, though varied, are fundamentally the same. And for that, I am grateful." The audience surged to its feet, not with cheers, but with a standing ovation of sobs and trembling hands, clapping through their tears. Outside, news organizations scrambled to provide live coverage. Social media platforms ignited with clips, and captions like, "The evening dignity brought Hollywood to its knees." And still, the question remained. What more would President Traoré disclose before the week concluded? The anticipation was almost too much to bear. But one thing was certain. This was no longer a mere event. This was history in the making. As the standing ovation gradually subsided, President Ibrahim Traoré moved nearer to Laurence Fishburne. He leaned in, speaking so that only Laurence could hear. The cameras documented the interaction, but the words remained private. Laurence went rigid. His entire body shook. One tear fell, then another, until he buried his face in his hands, unable to stem the tide of emotion. A collective gasp went through the hall, stunned. Traoré placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The whispered words had accessed something profound, a place no acting role, no accolade, no amount of applause had ever reached. When Laurence at last raised his head, his voice was fractured. You reminded me of my father tonight, a man who passed away thinking no one would remember his sacrifices. But you have shown me that he endures through me. The hall fell silent once more. No one moved. No one dared to violate the sanctity of the moment. And while the audience did not know the precise words Traoré had spoken, they understood that he had touched a wound and transformed it into a source of healing. The news spread like wildfire. The whisper that made Laurence Fishburne weep. Millions replayed the clip, trying to decipher what Traoré might have said. Social media was ablaze. Yet inside the hall, the only thing of consequence was the unspoken bond between the two men. Traoré then addressed the crowd again. His own eyes glistened, his voice thick with emotion. "We exist in a world that glorifies power," he said. Softly, but it forgets that the most immense power is compassion. Tonight, let us remember that dignity is not a privilege. It is a fundamental right, one we have a duty to defend for one another. Laurence reached out and grasped his hand, squeezing it firmly, a silent signal of his accord. The entire audience rose yet again, this time in a unified expression of tearful applause. A reporter later summed it up perfectly. It was not a political address, it was a human one, and it felt as though the entire world was in that room, breathing the same truth. In that moment, time itself seemed to suspend. The event concluded, but its repercussions were only just beginning. Outside, strangers embraced. Online, comments flooded in. "I have never been so moved by a speech. Traoré showed us what true leadership is." And Laurence's tears were all of our tears tonight. Later, Laurence managed to say to reporters, his voice still unsteady, "What he whispered to me is something I will carry in my heart for the rest of my days. It was not for the cameras, it was for my soul." And President Traoré, with profound humility, simply stated, "Sometimes the most powerful truths are not broadcast, but spoken quietly from one soul to another." For the remainder of the week, the world was consumed by conversation about it, yet those who were present in the hall knew one thing with certainty. They hadn't just observed a speech, they had been part of a moment of healing that would resonate for generations. And as the video was shared across the globe, millions wept not from sorrow, but from witnessing the rare and exquisite beauty of our shared humanity. Dear friends, if this account moved you, do not remain a passive observer. Become a part of this movement. Press the like button to celebrate these moments of profound truth. Subscribe to our channel so you will not miss another narrative that reminds us of our common human experience. And we invite you to comment below. What did you feel witnessing Laurence's tears? Your perspective is valuable. Let us continue this vital dialogue.